It was a chilly autumn morning, the kind where the air feels crisp and fresh, and the city buzzed with people heading to work or catching flights. At JFK Airport in New York City, two sisters stood at the gate, boarding passes in hand, ready for their long-awaited trip to London. They weren't just any passengers. They were accomplished women who had worked hard to get where they were. The older sister, a lawyer known for her sharp mind and passion for justice, and the younger one, a nonprofit worker dedicated to improving education around the world, had decided to treat themselves to this vacation after months of relentless schedules. They had splurged on first-class tickets, something they didn't do often but felt they deserved after all their hard work. For once, they wanted to relax in comfort, sip champagne, and enjoy the perks that came with flying up front. As they stepped onto the plane, smiles on their faces, they couldn't help but feel excited about the journey ahead. Little did they know, this flight would turn out to be anything but relaxing. The cabin crew greeted them warmly as they entered the luxurious first-class section. Plush leather seats awaited them, each equipped with personal entertainment screens, cozy blankets, and pillows. It was everything you'd expect from a premium experience. The sisters settled into their assigned seats near the window, chatting animatedly about their plans for the week. Maybe they'd visit some museums, try authentic British food, or simply wander through the streets of London soaking in the culture. Everything seemed perfect, or so it appeared. But perfection is fragile, and cracks began to show almost immediately. Across the aisle, another passenger boarded a middle-aged man dressed in an expensive suit. He glanced around the cabin before settling into his seat diagonally across from the sisters. At first, nothing seemed amiss. But then, subtle signs of discomfort started creeping in. The man shifted awkwardly in his seat, avoiding eye contact. His body language screamed unease, though neither sister paid much attention to it initially. People acted strange on planes sometimes. It wasn't uncommon. However, things took a turn when the man leaned over to speak to a nearby flight attendant. Though his voice was low, snippets of his words drifted toward the sisters. "I don't think I'm comfortable sitting here," he muttered, gesturing vaguely in their direction. The comment hung in the air like smoke, lingering uncomfortably. Was he talking about them? Surely not. Or maybe he was. The sisters exchanged glances, unsure whether to laugh off the situation or confront it head-on. Before they could decide, the same flight attendant approached them with a forced smile plastered across her face. She spoke softly, trying to mask the tension in her tone. "Ladies, we've received feedback from another passenger expressing concerns about seating arrangements. Would you mind moving to economy class?" For a moment, silence fell between the sisters. Had they heard correctly? Move to economy? After paying top dollar for first-class tickets? And why exactly were they being asked to relocate? No explanation was given beyond vague references to customer preferences. The request felt wrong, even insulting. Their hearts sank as realization dawned they weren't being moved because of logistics or operational issues. This was something deeper, uglier. The older sister cleared her throat, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her. "Can you explain what's going on here?" she asked, her eyes locking onto the flight attendants. The younger sister chimed in, her frustration bubbling to the surface. "Are you telling us we have to leave our seats because someone else doesn't want us here?" Passengers nearby began to take notice. Some pretended to focus on their books or phones, while others openly stared, curious about how the situation would unfold. The atmosphere grew tense, charged with unspoken emotions. The flight attendant fumbled for words, clearly uncomfortable herself but bound by protocol or perhaps pressure to follow through with the request. As the standoff continued, the sisters refused to budge. They weren't about to let anyone push them aside without a fight. After all, they hadn't done anything wrong. They had every right to be there, just like anyone else. The confrontation escalated, drawing more attention from fellow travelers. Whispers filled the cabin as people speculated about what might happen next. Would the sisters give in and move? Or would they stand their ground? What no one realized yet was that this incident was far from ordinary. It wasn't just about two passengers arguing over seating arrangements. It was about identity, dignity, and the systemic biases that still linger beneath the surface of modern society. And unbeknownst to everyone on board, this seemingly small conflict would soon spiral into something much bigger, something that would capture headlines, spark debates, and force an entire industry to reckon with its shortcomings. For now, though, the sisters sat firmly in their seats, determined not to back down. Whatever came next, they knew one thing for sure. They wouldn't let fear or prejudice dictate their actions. The tension inside the plane was thick, almost suffocating. Every word exchanged between the sisters and the flight attendant seemed to echo louder than it should, bouncing off the polished walls of the first-class cabin. Passengers who had initially tried to mind their own business couldn't help but glance over now and then, curiosity getting the better of them. Some looked sympathetic, others confused, and a few even irritated, like this whole ordeal was delaying their plans unnecessarily. Older sister leaned forward slightly in her seat, her voice calm but firm. "We're not moving," she said, meeting the flight attendant's eyes without flinching. "If someone has a problem with us being here, maybe they should move." Her younger sister nodded beside her, arms crossed tightly over her chest. They weren't just standing up for themselves anymore. They were drawing a line in the sand. This wasn't about comfort or convenience. It was about principle. The flight attendant shifted uncomfortably, clearly caught between following orders and dealing with two determined women who weren't backing down. She glanced toward the front of the plane, where another crew member stood whispering urgently into a phone. Whatever was happening behind the scenes, it was clear that things were escalating quickly. The man who had complained earlier sat stiffly in his seat, avoiding eye contact with anyone, especially the sisters. He looked uneasy, perhaps realizing that his words had set off a chain reaction he hadn't anticipated. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a few minutes, the flight attendant returned with reinforcements. A senior crew member, wearing the polished uniform of someone used to handling difficult situations, approached the sisters. His tone was polite but firm as he reiterated the request for them to move to economy class. "It would really help us resolve this situation smoothly," he said, flashing a practiced smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. But the sisters weren't buying it. The older one tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable. "Help who?" she asked pointedly. "Because it doesn't seem like moving us is going to solve anything. What exactly is the issue here? Are we breaking some rule? Is there something wrong with our tickets?" Her questions hung in the air, unanswered. The senior crew member hesitated, clearly unprepared for such directness. He glanced at the other passengers, many of whom were now openly watching the scene unfold. It was becoming increasingly clear that this wasn't just a private disagreement, it was turning into a spectacle. And spectacles have a way of spreading beyond the confines of a single airplane cabin. Realizing that diplomacy wasn't working, the older sister decided it was time to escalate matters. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through her contacts until she found the number she needed. With a deep breath, she pressed dial. As the call connected, she turned to her younger sister and whispered, "Let's see how far they're willing to take this." On the other end of the line, a deep, authoritative voice answered. "Hello?" It belonged to their father, a man who commanded respect not just because of his title, but because of the sheer force of his personality. He was the kind of person who could walk into a room and immediately become its center of gravity. Over the years, he had built a reputation as someone who didn't tolerate injustice, whether it happened to him or to those he cared about. "Dad," the older sister began, keeping her voice steady despite the chaos around her. "We're on a flight right now, and, well, something's come up." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "They want us to move out of first class because another passenger isn't comfortable sitting next to us." There was a brief silence on the other end of the line, followed by a sharp intake of breath. "What do you mean, not comfortable?" he asked, his tone instantly sharpening. She explained the situation as succinctly as possible, emphasizing how unreasonable the request was. Her younger sister chimed in occasionally, adding details about the growing tension on the plane. Their father listened intently, absorbing every word. When they finished speaking, he exhaled slowly, his mind already racing with possibilities. "Stay put," he instructed firmly. "Don't move an inch. I'll handle this." And handle it he did. Within minutes, he was on the phone with the airline's executives, his voice low but laced with steel. He demanded answers. Why were his daughters being singled out? Who had authorized this decision? And what steps were they planning to take to rectify the situation? Each question landed like a hammer blow, leaving the airline representatives scrambling for responses. Meanwhile, back on the plane, the standoff continued. The captain made an announcement over the intercom, informing passengers that there would be a delay due to an unspecified issue. A vague explanation did little to ease the growing unease among the travelers. Speculation ran rampant. Some guessed it was a mechanical problem, while others suspected something more sinister. A few passengers leaned closer to the sisters, offering quiet words of support. "You're doing the right thing," one elderly woman murmured, patting the older sister's hand reassuringly. Others remained silent, unsure of which side to take. As the minutes ticked by, the atmosphere grew heavier. The man who had complained earlier seemed to shrink into his seat, visibly uncomfortable under the weight of everyone's stares. The flight attendants moved nervously up and down the aisle, trying to maintain a sense of normalcy but failing miserably. Passengers exchanged knowing glances, sensing that this was no ordinary delay. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for or dreading, depending on their perspective. A representative from the airline appeared at the entrance of the first-class cabin, holding a tablet and looking distinctly uneasy. She approached the sisters with visible trepidation, stopping a few feet away as if afraid to get too close. "Ladies," she began hesitantly, "we've spoken with our team, and we'd like to offer you a full refund along with complimentary upgrades on your next flight. We sincerely apologize for any inconvenience caused." The offer was met with stony silence. The older sister raised an eyebrow, her expression unreadable. "A refund?" She repeated slowly, as if testing the word. "So let me get this straight. You expect us to leave our seats, give up the experience we paid for, and accept a refund as if nothing happened?" The representative nodded eagerly, clearly hoping this would diffuse the situation. But the sisters weren't satisfied. Money wasn't the issue here. It never had been. This was about dignity, about being treated fairly in a space they had every right to occupy. The younger sister leaned forward, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "What are you going to do about the fact that we were targeted? Because of who we are? Because that's what this feels like." The representative opened her mouth to respond but closed it again, unsure of what to say. Behind her, the senior crew member stepped forward, attempting to smooth things over. "We understand your concerns," he said diplomatically, though his tone lacked conviction. "We're committed to ensuring all our passengers feel welcome and respected." It was a hollow promise, and everyone knew it. The sisters exchanged a glance, communicating silently. They weren't going to settle for empty apologies or token gestures. If the airline wanted to make things right, they would need to do more than throw money at the problem. They would need to address the root cause. As the standoff dragged on, the ripple effects became impossible to ignore. Phones buzzed quietly throughout the cabin as passengers updated friends and family about the drama unfolding before their eyes. Social media lit up with posts speculating about what was happening on the flight. Hashtags began trending, amplifying the story far beyond the confines of the airplane. Journalists started reaching out to the airline for comment, forcing them to confront the reality that this incident was no longer a private matter. It was public news. Back in the corporate offices, executives scrambled to contain the fallout. Calls poured in from high-profile allies of the family, demanding accountability. Legal teams reviewed contracts and policies, bracing for potential lawsuits. Public relations departments drafted statements, attempting to spin the narrative in their favor, but none of it mattered, not yet anyway. The real power lay with the sisters and their father, who were determined to see justice served. For now, the plane remained grounded, stuck on the tarmac as negotiations continued. Passengers fidgeted in their seats, torn between frustration and fascination. Some grumbled about missed connections, while others expressed admiration for the sisters' courage. Through it all, the sisters remained resolute, refusing to budge until they received the answers and the respect they deserved. This wasn't just about one flight anymore. It was about sending a message that no one should be made to feel unwelcome simply because of who they are. And as the world watched and waited, it became clear that this message was resonating far beyond the cramped confines of an airplane cabin. The standoff on the plane had reached a boiling point. Passengers were restless, shifting uncomfortably in their seats as they waited for some kind of resolution. The sisters sat firmly in their first-class seats, refusing to budge despite the mounting pressure from the airline staff. Their father's voice echoed in their minds, "Don't move an inch." Those 4 words became their anchor, grounding them in a moment that felt surreal yet undeniably real. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, chaos was unfolding. Back at the airline's headquarters, executives huddled in emergency meetings, frantically trying to figure out how to salvage the situation. Calls were pouring in not just from the family's influential allies, but also from news outlets eager to get the scoop on what was quickly becoming a national story. Social media buzzed with hashtags like #FlyWithDignity and #EqualSeatsForAll, amplifying the incident far beyond the confines of the grounded aircraft. People shared their own stories of discrimination while traveling, flooding comment sections with raw, unfiltered accounts of similar experiences. It wasn't just about these 2 sisters anymore. It was about every traveler who had ever been made to feel unwelcome because of their race, gender, or identity. Their father was relentless. Armed with decades of experience navigating high-stakes situations, he knew exactly how to apply pressure where it hurt most: the airline's reputation. He contacted regulators, demanding investigations into systemic biases within the industry. He reached out to civil rights organizations, urging them to amplify the issue. And perhaps most importantly, he worked with his legal team to draft a statement that would send shockwaves through the aviation world. The message was clear: if this airline wanted to avoid a public relations disaster, they needed to act fast and decisively. Word spread like wildfire. Within hours, major news networks picked up the story, turning it into prime-time headlines. Anchors discussed the incident during evening broadcasts, framing it as a pivotal moment in the ongoing conversation about racial equality. Opinion pieces flooded online platforms, dissecting everything from corporate accountability to customer service ethics. Even celebrities weighed in, using their massive followings to call out the airline and demand justice for the sisters. On the tarmac, passengers began to realize the magnitude of what was happening. Some openly supported the sisters, nodding approvingly whenever they caught their gaze. Others whispered among themselves, debating whether the airline's response was justified. A businessman seated near the front muttered under his breath, "This is ridiculous. Why can't we just take off?" But when another passenger shot back, "Because fairness matters more than your schedule," the man fell silent, shrinking back into his seat. As the hours dragged on, tempers flared both inside and outside the plane. Flight attendants darted nervously between rows, attempting to reassure passengers that the delay wouldn't last much longer. Yet no one believed them, not even the crew themselves. Everyone could sense that this wasn't just a minor hiccup. It was a full-blown crisis. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the captain emerged from the cockpit. His face was grim as he walked to the front of the cabin, gripping the intercom microphone tightly. For a brief moment, the entire plane went quiet, all eyes fixed on him. Then, with a heavy sigh, he delivered the announcement everyone had been dreading. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to unforeseen circumstances, this flight has been canceled. We apologize for the inconvenience and will provide assistance with rebooking your travel plans." The reaction was immediate and explosive. Gasps rippled through the cabin as passengers processed the news. Some groaned in frustration, slamming their fists against armrests. Others erupted in applause, clearly siding with the sisters. One woman stood up, clapping loudly as she shouted, "About time someone stood up to this nonsense." Her voice carried over the din, sparking cheers from several others. Amidst the commotion, the sisters exchanged a glance. They hadn't expected things to escalate this far to the point where an entire flight would be grounded, but they couldn't deny the significance of the moment. This wasn't just a victory for them. It was a win for everyone who had ever faced discrimination while traveling. As passengers disembarked, many stopped to offer words of encouragement. An elderly man patted the older sister on the shoulder, saying, "You're doing important work, young lady. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." A teenage girl shyly handed the younger sister a note that read, "Thank you for standing up for us." Of course, not everyone was supportive. A few disgruntled passengers glared at the sisters as they passed by, muttering complaints about missed connections and wasted time. One man even went so far as to snap a photo of them, presumably to post online later. But the sisters didn't let it faze them. They understood that change rarely came without resistance, and they were prepared to face whatever backlash might come their way. Outside the plane, the scene was equally chaotic. Reporters swarmed the terminal, microphones thrust toward anyone willing to speak. Airport staff scrambled to accommodate stranded travelers, setting up makeshift help desks to assist with rebooking flights. Meanwhile, the airline's social media accounts were inundated with comments, some supportive, others scathing, as people around the world weighed in on the controversy. In the days that followed, the fallout continued to reverberate. The CEO of the airline issued a public apology, acknowledging the harm caused by the incident and pledging to implement new policies aimed at preventing future occurrences. However, the damage was already done. Trust in the brand had been shaken, and customers began flocking to competitors who promised better treatment. Activists seized the opportunity to push for broader reforms across the industry, calling for stricter regulations and greater transparency. For the sisters, the experience was transformative. What had started as a personal affront had blossomed into something much bigger, a movement. They realized they had tapped into a collective frustration that had been simmering beneath the surface for years. Friends, colleagues, and even strangers reached out to share their gratitude, thanking the sisters for shining a light on an issue that had long been ignored. Their father, too, played a crucial role in shaping the narrative. Leveraging his influence, he organized a coalition of business leaders, activists, and policymakers to address systemic inequities in air travel. Together, they drafted proposals for bias training programs, anonymous reporting systems, and independent oversight committees to hold airlines accountable. These efforts gained traction worldwide, sparking meaningful conversations about privilege, power, and inclusion. Despite the whirlwind of attention, the sisters remained grounded. They understood that their fight wasn't over, it was only beginning. While they appreciated the support and recognition, they knew that true progress required sustained effort. So they channeled their energy into advocacy work, partnering with organizations dedicated to combating racism and promoting equality. They spoke at conferences, appeared on talk shows, and collaborated with educators to develop resources for raising awareness about discrimination in public spaces. Through it all, they stayed connected to their roots, drawing strength from their shared history and the values instilled in them by their parents. Their father often reminded them that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's the decision to act despite it. And act they did, refusing to let adversity define them. Instead, they used their platform to inspire others, proving that even in the face of injustice, resilience and determination could spark real change. By the time they finally boarded another flight weeks later, the sisters had become symbols of hope and empowerment. Airline staff greeted them warmly, recognizing them as catalysts for transformation. Fellow passengers approached them with smiles, sharing stories of how their actions had inspired them to speak up against discrimination in their own lives. As the plane soared into the sky, the sisters looked out the window, reflecting on everything they had endured and achieved. They knew there was still much work to be done. Racism and prejudice weren't problems that could be solved overnight. But for now, they allowed themselves a moment of peace, grateful for the opportunity to make the world just a little bit fairer. After all, change begins with a single step, or in their case, a single phone call. The days following the incident were a whirlwind of emotions, media attention, and unexpected opportunities. For the sisters, life had changed in ways they never could have imagined. What began as a personal ordeal quickly transformed into a national conversation about fairness, dignity, and accountability. The story of their flight and the subsequent grounding of the plane spread like wildfire, sparking debates in households, workplaces, and online forums. It wasn't just about them anymore. It was about every person who had ever felt marginalized or mistreated while traveling. As news outlets clamored for interviews, the sisters found themselves thrust into the spotlight. At first, they hesitated. Neither of them sought fame or recognition, they simply wanted justice. But after discussing it with their father, they realized this was an opportunity to amplify their message and push for meaningful change. So, they agreed to appear on a popular morning talk show where millions tuned in to hear their side of the story. Sitting across from the host, the older sister spoke with quiet confidence, her words measured but powerful. This wasn't just about U.S. being asked to move seats, she explained. It was about being treated as if we didn't belong, not because of anything we did, but because of who we are. Her younger sister nodded, adding, "We're not unique. This happens to so many people, especially black travelers. The difference is most don't have the resources or support to fight back. That's why we decided to speak up." Their honesty resonated deeply with viewers. Social media erupted with messages of solidarity, with hashtags like #StandWithThem and #TravelWithDignity trending worldwide. People shared their own stories, some heartbreaking, others infuriating, all pointing to a pattern of systemic bias in the travel industry. One woman recounted how she was removed from a flight after another passenger complained about her natural hairstyle. A man described being denied access to a lounge despite having a valid membership, simply because the staff assumed he didn't look like someone who belonged there. These voices joined together, creating a chorus of demand for accountability and reform. Inspired by the overwhelming response, the sisters decided to channel their newfound platform into action. They teamed up with their father to launch a foundation aimed at addressing racial discrimination in air travel and beyond. The initiative focused on 3 key areas: education, advocacy, and policy reform. They partnered with airlines, hotels, and transportation companies to develop training programs that would help employees recognize and combat unconscious biases. They also created a hotline where travelers could report incidents of discrimination anonymously, ensuring their voices would be heard without fear of retaliation. Their efforts gained traction almost immediately. Influential figures from various industries threw their weight behind the cause, amplifying the foundation's mission through social media campaigns and public endorsements. Civil rights organizations praised their work, calling it a much-needed step toward dismantling systemic racism. Even competitors of the airline involved in the original incident reached out, eager to collaborate and demonstrate their commitment to inclusivity. Meanwhile, the airline itself faced significant consequences. Regulatory bodies imposed hefty fines, citing violations of anti-discrimination laws. Several executives resigned amid mounting criticism, unable to weather the storm of public outrage. In an attempt to rebuild trust, the company announced sweeping changes to its policies, including mandatory diversity training for all employees and the establishment of an independent oversight board to review complaints. While some applauded these efforts, others remained skeptical, questioning whether the reforms were genuine or merely a PR stunt. Despite the progress, challenges persisted. Not everyone supported the sisters' crusade. Critics argued that they had overreacted, claiming the initial request to move seats was standard procedure and not racially motivated. Online trolls targeted them relentlessly, posting hateful comments and spreading misinformation. Some even accused them of exploiting the situation for personal gain, ignoring the fact that they had turned down lucrative offers from brands hoping to capitalize on their popularity. But the sisters refused to let negativity derail them. They leaned on each other and their father for strength, drawing inspiration from the countless supporters who rallied around them. "We knew going in that this wouldn't be easy," the older sister admitted during one interview. "Change never is. But if our experience can make someone else's life a little better, then it's worth it." Their resilience paid off. Slowly but surely, tangible results began to emerge. Airlines started implementing stricter guidelines for handling passenger disputes, emphasizing respect and fairness above all else. Hotels introduced new protocols to ensure guests were treated equally, regardless of their background. Transportation companies invested in technology to monitor and address discriminatory behavior among staff. The ripple effects extended far beyond the travel industry, inspiring similar initiatives in retail, hospitality, and healthcare. For the sisters, the journey was as transformative as it was challenging. They learned firsthand the power of standing up for what's right, even when it feels like the world is against you. Their bond deepened through the experience, forged in the fire of adversity. They also discovered a renewed sense of purpose. Realizing that their voices could drive real, lasting change. Their father watched proudly as his daughters navigated the complexities of activism, balancing compassion with determination. He often reminded them that true leadership wasn't about seeking glory, it was about lifting others up. "You've shown people that they don't have to stay silent," he told them one evening. "That's a gift you can give to the world." As time went on, the sisters became fixtures at conferences and panel discussions, sharing their insights with audiences eager to learn. They collaborated with educators to create workshops for young people, teaching them how to identify and challenge bias in everyday situations. They worked tirelessly, knowing that the road ahead would be long but believing wholeheartedly that every step mattered. Through it all, they never lost sight of why they started this journey in the first place: to ensure that no one else would have to endure what they had on that fateful flight. Their story served as a reminder that courage and conviction could spark extraordinary outcomes, even in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds. And though the scars of that day would always linger, they carried them with pride, knowing they had turned pain into purpose. The sisters weren't just survivors. They were trailblazers, paving the way for a future where everyone could travel with dignity and respect. Months had passed since that unforgettable flight, and life for the sisters had settled into a new rhythm, one filled with purpose, challenges, and unexpected joys. The whirlwind of media appearances, interviews, and advocacy work had slowed down slightly, but their mission remained unchanged. Every day they woke up knowing they were part of something bigger than themselves, a movement aimed at creating a fairer, more inclusive world. The foundation they had launched alongside their father continued to grow, gaining momentum with each passing week. It wasn't just about addressing discrimination in air travel anymore. It had evolved into a broader initiative tackling bias across all forms of transportation and public spaces. Hotels began adopting the training programs developed by the foundation, teaching staff how to interact with guests respectfully and without prejudice. Ride-sharing companies implemented stricter policies to ensure drivers treated passengers equally, regardless of their appearance or background. Even airports started installing feedback kiosks where travelers could report incidents anonymously, ensuring no voice went unheard. But what truly set this effort apart was its focus on storytelling. The sisters understood that data and statistics were important, but personal stories held the power to move hearts and minds. So, they created a platform where people could share their experiences openly, whether through written testimonials, videos, or live events. These narratives became the backbone of the Foundation's campaigns, humanizing the issue and making it impossible for anyone to dismiss as just another problem. One evening, the older sister sat at her kitchen table, scrolling through submissions from individuals who had reached out to the Foundation. There was a young mother recounting how she was denied seating on a train because her stroller supposedly took up too much space, despite plenty of room being available. A college student described being questioned repeatedly by security personnel at an airport simply because of his attire. An elderly man shared how he was ignored by hotel staff during check-in, while other guests were greeted warmly. Each story carried its own weight, its own pain. Yet together they formed a tapestry of resilience and hope. She forwarded some of these accounts to her younger sister, who was working late in her home office. When she read them, tears welled up in her eyes, not out of sadness, but out of gratitude. Gratitude for the courage of those willing to speak up and for the opportunity to make a difference. "This is why we do what we do," she whispered to herself, feeling a renewed sense of determination. Their father often joined them in these moments, offering guidance and encouragement. He reminded them that change didn't happen overnight. It required patience, persistence, and unwavering belief in the cause. "You're planting seeds," he would say. "Some will sprout quickly, others may take years, but every seed matters." As word of their efforts spread, invitations poured in from around the globe. The sisters traveled to conferences, universities, and community centers, sharing their journey and inspiring others to take action. They met people from all walks of life: activists, policymakers, business leaders, and everyday citizens, all united by a desire to create a better future. During one particularly memorable event, a teenager approached them after their talk, clutching a notebook filled with ideas for combating racism in her school. "You've shown me that I can make a difference too," she said shyly. The sisters hugged her tightly, knowing they had sparked something special back home. They celebrated small victories along the way. Airlines began issuing public apologies. When incidents occurred, acknowledging mistakes instead of brushing them under the rug. Hotels displayed signs reminding staff and guests alike that everyone deserved respect. Transportation companies introduced incentives for employees who demonstrated exceptional inclusivity in their interactions. None of these changes were perfect, but they represented progress, and that was worth celebrating. Still, the road ahead wasn't without obstacles. Critics continued to question their motives, accusing them of exaggerating the issue or seeking attention. Online trolls persisted, flooding comment sections with hateful remarks designed to undermine their credibility. And there were days when the sheer magnitude of the work felt overwhelming, leaving them drained and disheartened. On one such day, the older sister called her father, her voice heavy with exhaustion. "Dad, sometimes it feels like we're fighting a losing battle," she admitted. "No matter how hard we try, there's always someone ready to push back." Her father listened quietly before responding. "You're not fighting to win," he said gently. "You're fighting to remind people of what's right. That's a different kind of victory." His words stayed with her, echoing in her mind whenever doubt crept in. Slowly, she realized that their fight wasn't about eliminating racism overnight. It was about chipping away at the walls of prejudice, brick by brick. Each policy change, each training program, each story shared brought them closer to breaking down those barriers. Eventually, the sisters found themselves boarding another international flight, this time bound for a global summit on equality and inclusion. As they walked through the terminal, heads turned in recognition. Airline staff greeted them warmly, apologizing profusely for the past and promising better days ahead. Fellow passengers approached them with smiles, thanking them for standing up and speaking out. One woman handed them a handwritten note that read, "Thank you for giving me the courage to believe in a better world." Once aboard the plane, they settled into their first-class seats, savoring the irony of the moment. This time, there were no complaints, no awkward glances, no demands to relocate. Just peace and a profound sense of accomplishment. They exchanged a glance, their eyes reflecting pride, relief, and quiet joy. For now, they allowed themselves to relax, letting the hum of the engines lull them into a rare moment of calm. Looking out the window as the plane ascended into the sky, the older sister reflected on everything they had been through. She thought about the countless hours spent strategizing, the late-night conversations with her sister and father, the sleepless nights wondering if they were doing enough. She thought about the strangers whose stories had touched her heart and fueled her resolve. And she thought about the future, a future where perhaps, one day, no one would have to endure the indignities they once faced. Her younger sister leaned over, interrupting her thoughts. "You know," she said softly, "we didn't choose this path, but I think maybe it chose us." The older sister smiled, nodding slowly. "Yeah," she replied, "and I wouldn't trade it for anything." As the plane soared higher, carrying them toward new horizons, the sisters felt a deep sense of fulfillment. They knew the fight wasn't over, that it might never truly be. But they also knew they had made a difference. Together, they had turned a single act of defiance into a catalyst for change, proving that even in the darkest moments, light could shine through. For now, they let themselves dream of what lay ahead, not just for them, but for everyone who believed in a world where fairness and dignity weren't privileges, but rights.